please welcome to the stage Ella Sagar, reporter at the Media Leader, who will introduce her panellists Jess and David. Please welcome them to the stage.
I'll sit over here. Hello, everyone. Can you hear us okay? Great. Welcome to this discussion. We've got about 15 minutes to chat about the power and future of news brand podcasts. So I'm delighted to just get straight to it and introduce my lovely panel. So Jess Austin is presenter of the Metro's My Platform podcast, and David Marsland is head of audio at Evening Standard. Thanks for joining me, guys. So just as a little fun poll at the beginning, who listens to a podcast about news at all? All right, you're in the right place. Everyone. This is good. So to start off with, Jess, why do you think, you have your own podcast obviously, but why do you think the podcast format works so well for news brands, for journalism? And then David, if you wouldn't mind jumping in afterwards, that'd be great.
Sure.
So I listen to podcasts because I want to feel like an expert. I want someone to tell me something I don't know and I want to learn. And I think that's why it works so well with journalists too. Journalists are experts in their field and they're really good at asking the kind of questions that readers want to know. They know how to do their research, they can probe when the time's right, they know what's legally problematic to say and what's not. So I think that's why journalists make really great leaders of podcasts, but also news brands too have a lot to offer. They've got social teams, video teams, podcast teams, legal teams as well. And so they have the resources to help make podcasts and news podcasts a success.
Mm-hmm. I do
David.
love my legal team. They're my friends. They're my best friends in the entire world. There was a survey last year by YouGov and Acast. So Acast is one of the big distribution partners for podcasting that found that 1 in 5 of podcast listeners use podcasting as their primary news source. So when they want to find out about something, they're heading into their Apple, they're heading into Spotify to find a program that's going to tell them about this subject. So there's something like 2 million podcasts out there, right? So how are they going to find the trusted news source? And at least initially, what they're going to do is find the one they already trust. They're going to go to the Evening Standard. It's been here for 200 years. They want to find out about something that's going on in London, it's going to be affecting London. I know I can go to that place and I can trust it. So if we're not there, where are they going to go? So fortunately, we are there, and that's how we're finding listeners are coming to us. But also people who are going, oh, this thing's happening in London, who does well? They think, Standard, associated with London, going to go straight to there. So we're bringing in new audiences, and people are discovering us in all kinds of different ways. So it's working really, really well. It's a great little relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's that kind of deep dive element to it, which is quite interesting when you're trying to get to the grips with a really complicated topic or something that's quite personal to you, if it's local or anything like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've got that more kind of informal aspect to a lot of podcasts as well. So people can listen to it, go, I don't know anything about this. And they can sit there and they can listen to 2 experts. One of those experts will probably go, I don't know what's going on here. And then they'll have that explained to them by other people. So you have that informal, not judgmental way of coming into really complicated, complex situations with trusted people that you know. And they become your pals as well. Everyone thinks of their favourite podcast presenter as being their best mate. It's a nightmare when you go to the pub to come up to you.
Does this happen to you, Jess, with your being a presenter of your own podcast for Metro?
Not yet.
No.
Hopefully one day.
So can you tell us a bit more about My Platform and what it's about?
Sure.
Yeah.
So I'm the opinion and first person editor at the Metro. Our section is called Platform. I'm going to say platform a lot in the next 30 seconds. Platform is all about giving a platform to underheard and underrepresented voices in the media. It's kind of hearing people's lived experiences and how it shaped their worldview. And what I wanted to do with My Platform is take our 10 best articles of the best performing articles of the last couple of years and speak to the authors behind them about what inspired them, their story, what the reaction to their articles was like, how it's impacted them, and unhindered by a word count, which was the main barrier I faced with that. We did lots of really interesting pieces. The podcast was super diverse. We had, people talking about being diagnosed with HIV at 21, about finding love after loss and moving on. We had someone talking about drag queens performing for kids. We had a piece about pretty privilege. So it was a variety. Every week was very different.
Yeah, I bet. And David, as head of audio at the Evening Standard, do you So how do you choose the right podcast for the right audience, or like, and then the kind of how does that commercial side enter into things as well?
Well, I mean, this is the same for every publisher. And when you're thinking about going into audio, it's what do I do best? And with the Evening Standard is the best in the world at London. So we're going to do London. So we've got the Leader Daily News Show, which is the news for London, for Londoners. But what other things do we do that's really good? We are one of the most influential newspapers in theatre, for example. So we have a theatre show. We can bring on massive names onto that. Ian McKellen, Joseph Fiennes, all these people coming on there that you wouldn't be able to get. But because of the Evening Standard, they want to talk to the Evening Standard. And we're big in things like sport. So we've got, how do we do sport? Well, let's bring in Lawrence Dallaglio, one of the biggest names in sport, and get him to host his own podcast for the Rugby World Cup that's coming on right now. And brands are looking to be associated with those things. We have Samsung sponsoring the Rugby World Cup podcast with Lawrence Dallaglio right now. So it works for everybody. You're bringing in audiences, you're creating entertaining shows that people are coming back to week after week, time after time, spending 30 minutes with your brand, with the brand that's sponsoring us every single week, or in the case of something like Leader, every single day. And that's great engagement for people.
And I think I remember in our prep call, you were talking about how mostly with podcasts, there's certain kinds of formats. Most popular, I guess, is the host read format, but your journalists don't do the host reads, which I think is quite interesting.
Yeah, well, it depends on the show, but for the straight news shows like The Leader or the Tech and Science Daily, it just makes no sense for a journalist to do that, because the value of these things, the value of the Evening Standard brand is trust. So if you've got a journalist saying, Company Y, I used to say Company X for this, but I'm going to say Company Y now because Company X is a whole new thing. Company Y is the greatest company in the entire world, and you should all use Company Y. So they go and do that for a week, and then the following week, that exact same journalist is saying, Company Y, they're a nightmare, aren't they? That's coming up as our top story. That's not going to work. It's going to break down trust, and people are listening to us for trust. So yeah, what we do instead is we work with companies like, we did a thing with Uber. So we have a completely separate 90-second little mini documentary at the top, which is done by someone that's not the presenter of the Tech and Science show. And then we build that up over 5 days. And that separates the advert from the podcast. And that works for listeners as well, because they know what's an advert and what's a podcast, and that enhances that trust. And when advertisers are working with us, it's the trust of the brand that they're working with as well, isn't it? That's why they're coming to us. That's why they're using legacy media, as it's called, because people trust it, and they know that they're being associated with that trust level.
And that kind of news brand and the trust, news brand podcasts have got, because of that, a kind of better sort of engagement. I think we were talking about earlier, weren't we, in terms of like that sort of recall and those sorts of things. Am I right in saying?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots and lots of surveys and research done into the effectiveness of podcast advertising, and all of it shows that when people listen to podcasts, they tend to, use the code that you're given, use code Evening Standard here, and they'll put that in, they'll get their 10% off, whatever they're doing that. So that all of that stuff has been shown to work, and it's all down to, can I trust this brand? Can I trust the brand that's associated with it? Yeah.
And so podcasting, I mean, as a term, has only been around for about 20 years or so. But there obviously as a journey, it's been on quite a massive growth journey. And along that journey, there are pitfalls, there are mistakes. So I'm just curious what pitfalls and mistakes you guys might have encountered along the way in your personal kind of experiences with podcasts. Jess?
So I think with COVID and afterwards, there's podcasts, a lot of them moved to remote recording, and that's something that we did, which wasn't necessarily successful for us. While it was really great for organising guests and getting them in and their flexibility, it meant that we couldn't have consistent sound quality. It made it harder to promote the video assets. There was another reason as well, but it wasn't.
Those are two big enough reasons, I think.
Yeah, no, it wasn't exactly the smoothest process. It made it harder to promote than, it made it quite hard to read people's facial expressions because the video quality wasn't always necessarily transparent both sides. So that was kind of one hurdle that I came up against.
Yeah, no, but a lot of other hosts and publishers would have encountered that as well. David, any pitfalls, any learning curves?
The biggest kind of regret I had was a long time ago, and I worked for a company called Audio Boom, which is still one of the big distribution platforms. And you know when you have a podcast and it's got that little ad in the middle of it? Well, this was such a long time ago that that little bit of technology didn't exist. So we invented it and we gave it to our podcast hosts and all that, but we didn't tell anyone about it. And then about 6 months later, another platform caught up with us, did it, and they put a press release out and they said they were the world's first company to do it. And we were like, but they weren't, but it was too late. So the thing is, if you do something in an innovative field like podcasting, tell everybody about it. Immediately go in there and go, we've done this, we're great, we should do that.
Make a podcast about it.
Make a podcast about it. Yeah, we should have done. I never thought of that. Imagine a podcast company not thinking of that. Yeah.
The other thing that we've kind of hinted at is the kind of commercialization of and the advertising opportunity in podcasts, and sponsorships one. What do you think are the opportunities and the kind of challenges? Jess, from your perspective as a presenter, is this something that you see on your side of things, or?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of potential. Metro is really trying to bridge the gap between commercial and editorial. So it's not just audio, it's 360. You have videos, you have articles alongside. We had great success with that. With our Pretty Privilege episode, we ran an article alongside it, basically from the speaker's story of realising that she experienced pretty privilege in her youth, but as she got older, she was starting to feel invisible. And the article that we did alongside it did 1 million views across our site and MSN and Apple and other platforms. So it was wide-ranging. Metro also has had real success with branded platforms and they're branded podcasts, and they're really hoping to expand the editorial offering alongside these. So I think there is loads of potential. In terms of challenges, I think, and this is something that I think pertains to all podcasts, not necessarily news-affiliated ones, but anything that's sponsored, you have the risk of maintaining the messaging you want to send, but it also being brand safe. You don't want to muffle guests, but you also don't want them to say really controversial stuff. In some ways, I think that journalists are actually very well placed to deal with that challenge, in that, again, we know how to broach those difficult conversations and push back where needed, but also probe where we can get more information.
Well, podcasting Even Sound works really closely with our commercial team. We look to kind of identify what we can do that works with brands, and we have lots of conversations about what sort of things that brands are looking for. But there's so much, just in podcasting in general, just a huge amount of opportunity, because audiences have grown year on year in the 10 years I've been working in podcasts. I think it's something like 20 million people are listening to podcasts right now. But there's a lot of people that aren't. And you've got something like 71% of the United Kingdom has an awareness of podcasts, but only 41% of people are listening to them on a monthly basis, and only 25% of them are listening to on a weekly basis. So that's people who are prepped and ready and willing to dip into the podcast world, and we just have to find those ways of doing that. So that's kind of the sorts of things that we're looking at. How do I bring in these audiences who maybe know about podcasting and want to have a look at it? How do we encourage those people to come in, and what are the commercial value of that? And how do we work with sponsors and supporters to make those things work? How do we get that so that we can get stuff out that's well funded and that does well for the newspaper, for our reputation, but also brings in audiences for advertisers as well? Such an exciting, really interesting kind of field to be working in right now. And it's one of the rare, because everything is so new, because so much stuff is developing, because the technology is changing, because the way people are approaching podcasts is changing. It's such an exciting area to be in. So we're going to be, people talk about this being the golden age of podcasting, but it's not yet. It's still to come.
We're just the best is yet to come.
Yeah, the best is absolutely yet to come. We're not quite there yet, but you can almost see it. We're coming up over the horizon there, and it's like, oh, this is exciting. So get in there.
Get in now.
Yeah.
So what you're saying, the best is yet to come. So what is that kind of golden age looking like for both of you in the future of news brand podcasts? What would a golden age look like?
I think for us it's the move towards 360, so taking in all the different components. You've got the audio, but you've got the video, you've got the articles, and we've got a number of podcasts. We've got Mammograms and Me, hosted by Dawn Butler. We've got Smut Drop, which is about sex, Mentally Yours, which is about mental health. I think it's experimenting, seeing what works, trying to diversify podcasts a little bit, and just growth, but trying different things.
For me, it's about connecting with those audiences, and the Evening Standard is so well placed here in London to do that, because we talk to them constantly. We find out, they tell us all their most intimate stories. We got a podcast launching, which I'm not going to tell you about, which is basically on the principle of the Evening Standard is trusted, the only newspaper in the world trusted by audiences to tell their most intimate stories. So that's kind of the areas that we're looking at exploring. The city, what our audience is, what the Evening Standard is, all of these things are coming up. It's dang good.
Do you think people reveal more on a podcast than they would, say, for a written article or anything like that?
Yeah, up to a point. I mean, I worked in television for a long time. As soon as you turn a television camera on, people kind of change because they move into this kind of presenter kind of mode, regardless of what you're doing. As a newspaper journalist, it's more discreet because you've got your little notepad there, and people tend to forget about that. But when you're sitting inside a podcast studio and the lights are all nice, and you've got some podcasters have glasses of wine. You do not get a glass of wine if you turn up at the Evening Standard studio. Maybe afterwards, but not during. It's a much more relaxed, more intimate atmosphere, and people do, those microphones do fade away, and people do chat, and they do have conversations, and they do talk. They're talking as if they're talking to their friends, and you are a friend sitting there at the back. They know you're there. You're invited to, and you can listen to this really interesting, intimate conversation that people talk about, and they use things, and they tell you these things, and they explain stuff. It's just a really nice way of doing stuff. And imagine that going into your ears every single day. It's beautiful.
Well, people are far less likely to self-edit when they're talking to someone. It's no longer someone asking questions behind a computer screen. It's actually getting to know someone, forming that relationship, and then feeling slightly more comfortable divulging their secrets and opinions to you, even the more controversial ones.
And just as a kind of fun last question, what would be your ideal podcast guest or topic, Jess? I'll start with you.
I'm slightly obsessed with the apocalypse.
Okay.
So I'd really like to speak to a prepper, and I'd also really like to speak to, say, an expert in asteroids and find out whether that prepper is actually going to save their own life.
So these are the kind of doomsday.
Oh yeah, I want to know
underground
everything.
bunker.
Mainly, I want to know if I'm going to survive the apocalypse. I know I'm not. If I was a Victorian child, I would be dead. But I want to know. I want to know if there's any hope.
Okay. I mean, let's hope there is hope. I was not expecting that. But
No, that's
great.
that's taken me by surprise too. I don't know. We get a lot of my favourite guests on anyway, like Ian McCallum on the theatre show, or like Eddie Jones on our rugby show, and those kinds of things. We get those because we're the Evening Standard. But who I really, really want, I've got 25 seconds to say this. I want to put Steven Spielberg on my business show because I think Steven Spielberg is the most unsung business hero of all time. Guy, 27-year-old, made Jaws, and everybody thought it was because he was a young kid. Then, 18, 20 years later, he makes Jurassic Park when he's middle-aged and he's still connecting up with the kids. I want to know how he does that, how he works. He made Jurassic Park and Schindler's List at the same time on different continents, right?
I didn't know that.
Doing one or the other. How do you do that? How do you pull that off, working with thousands of people on different continents? Amazing, guys.
Okay, got to make this happen. All right, thank you so much both for sharing your insight, wisdom. That's about all we've got time for, I think.
Thank you, Ella.
Thank you.